As we grow older, memory challenges can become an expected part of the aging process. Yet there are individuals who seem to defy the odds and remain mentally sharp well into their 90s and beyond, which raises the question, what are they doing differently? One such remarkable example is a 94-year-old who not only preserved his cognitive abilities, but actually improved them through a simple daily brain exercise routine that he swears by. This isn't some flashy app or expensive supplement. This is a consistent, grounded practice based on decades of neurological insight, behavioral science, and a deep personal commitment to staying mentally active. His routine starts the moment he wakes up, not with a cup of coffee, but with intentional mental activation. He begins each day by recalling and verbally listing the full names of his grandchildren, their birthdays, and one meaningful memory associated with each of them. This act of personal recollection, grounded in emotion and connection, stimulates the hippocampus, the part of the brain deeply tied to memory formation and retrieval. But that's just the start. He then spends exactly 10 minutes solving number puzzles, basic arithmetic with a twist. For example, he might take the number 4321 and try to reach zero by subtracting multiples of prime numbers in his head, or alternate between adding and subtracting to land at a fixed target. These aren't just math games. They're brain gymnastics that flex executive function, working memory, and problem-solving abilities, all of which decline if left unstimulated. What makes his approach truly unique, though, is the integration of physical movement into mental activity. While engaging in these mental exercises, he walks in place or moves around the house, a practice shown to increase cerebral blood flow and enhance cognitive performance. Research has consistently shown that combining movement with cognitive tasks enhances neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire and adapt, which is critical in aging populations. After his morning routine, he proceeds to what he calls his brain challenge meal, where he cooks his breakfast without looking at recipes or using timers. This may sound simple, but to do it consistently requires the brain to recall steps, measure time intuitively, and multitask, all higher-level brain functions that often deteriorate first with age. His breakfast always includes omega-3 rich foods like walnuts or chia seeds, and he adds turmeric to his eggs or porridge, tapping into the anti-inflammatory and neuroprotective properties of these foods. He also recites a new quote every day from a handwritten notebook that he has compiled over the years. These quotes range from philosophers to poets to personal mantras, and he doesn't just memorize them. He reflects on them aloud, connecting them to past life experiences or current events. This reflection forms part of what neurologists refer to as semantic memory strengthening, engaging with information in a meaningful context to create lasting cognitive connections. Then, he engages in what may seem like an unusual but powerfully effective practice. He writes one letter a day by hand to someone in his life. Whether it's a thank you note, a memory shared with a long-lost friend, or a new connection he's made, this act of handwriting is incredibly valuable. Studies show that writing by hand uses more regions of the brain than typing, involving complex motor skills, memory recall, and emotional processing. More than that, it strengthens a sense of purpose and connection, two psychological factors strongly associated with longevity and cognitive resilience. After lunch, he takes a short walk outdoors, but it's not just any walk. It's a mindful sensory experience. He deliberately names 5 things he can see, 4 he can hear, 3 he can feel, 2 he can smell, and 1 he can taste. This sensory grounding exercise, often used in modern mindfulness therapy, also activates the prefrontal cortex and calms the amygdala, promoting mental clarity and emotional balance. His afternoon routine continues with one of the most overlooked exercises for memory: storytelling. Every day, he records himself narrating a short story from his life. These stories are rich with detail, emotion, and sequence, which forces the brain to retrieve and organize memories, a practice proven to reinforce memory consolidation. He listens back to his stories weekly to track which details remain consistent and which ones he forgets, treating it as a kind of cognitive self-audit. The routine he follows has not only sharpened his mental acuity, but has also enhanced his emotional health, reduced anxiety, and given him a renewed sense of vitality. Rather than surrender to the decline often associated with aging, he's chosen to engage every day in practices that support, challenge, and enrich his brain in deeply meaningful ways. And what makes this even more inspiring is that none of this requires special equipment, apps, or supervision. It's a simple, structured, deeply personal routine that any senior can adopt with a bit of intention and consistency. And it's only the beginning of what this man does each day to keep his brain not just alive, but thriving. What sets this 94-year-old man apart isn't just his refusal to accept mental decline as inevitable, but his strategic, layered approach to brain health that addresses multiple cognitive domains simultaneously, something neurologists and geriatric psychologists have increasingly recognized as crucial in preserving long-term memory and preventing neurodegeneration. After his morning and early afternoon rituals that activate memory recall, executive functioning, emotional processing, and mindfulness, he transitions into what he refers to as his creative hour, a period he has strictly maintained for over 3 decades, where he pushes his brain into novel territories by learning or attempting something entirely unfamiliar each day. For example, on Mondays, he works on learning new languages, not entire grammars, but a handful of unfamiliar words, and then challenges himself to use those words in a fictional sentence that he writes down and later reads aloud. He rotates between Spanish, Japanese, German, and Swahili not because he needs to be fluent, but because forcing the brain to create phonetic patterns, assign meaning to unfamiliar symbols, and connect those meanings to existing knowledge stimulates deep neural pathways associated with long-term memory encoding and linguistic flexibility. On Tuesdays, he sketches, not professionally, but meditatively, recreating faces of people he remembers or inventing landscapes from memory. Drawing is a complex activity that engages visuospatial reasoning, planning, and creativity, all of which are tied to neuroplasticity and critical thinking. He claims that trying to remember a friend's facial features from 40 years ago and sketching them is more mentally invigorating than any crossword puzzle, and neuroscientific studies support this, noting that integrating visual memory with motor coordination creates robust neural crosstalk, which can offset the symptoms of mild cognitive impairment. On Wednesdays and Thursdays, he listens to music he's never heard before, ranging from traditional Mongolian throat singing to modern experimental jazz, and tries to identify instruments, rhythms, and lyrics, and then write a reflection on how it made him feel or what memory it stirred. This combination of auditory processing, emotional introspection, and written expression is an advanced cognitive task that few seniors attempt, but which delivers rich cognitive benefits. On Fridays, he tackles logic puzzles from old math journals or riddles he finds online, but with a twist, he always explains the solution out loud, as if teaching someone else. This act of teaching forces the brain to clarify, structure, and validate knowledge, which embeds it more deeply than passive learning ever could. On Saturdays, he initiates what he calls historical reconstruction, where he picks a year in history and challenges himself to recall or research events that occurred globally, nationally, and in his personal life during that time, then maps connections between those events on paper. This exercise not only engages memory, but also fosters a sense of continuity and context, both of which are vital for seniors struggling with episodic memory loss or identity confusion. Sundays are his brain rest days, but even those are filled with passive stimulation like watching documentaries, nature shows, or philosophical lectures, always with a notebook in hand for jotting thoughts, questions, or summaries. But perhaps the most powerful part of his routine isn't a task at all, it's a mindset. He approaches every day with curiosity, structure, and purpose, And neuroscience has confirmed that seniors who maintain a sense of purpose show slower hippocampal shrinkage, fewer signs of Alzheimer's biomarkers, and better executive functioning. He also ensures regular social interaction, which he does not treat as optional. Every afternoon, he engages in at least one meaningful conversation, whether it's through a phone call, video chat, or in person, and he always asks thoughtful questions about someone's childhood, opinions, beliefs, or dreams. These aren't just chats. They're opportunities to spark emotional engagement, narrative memory, and empathy, all of which involve complex neural processes that keep the brain active and plastic. He even plays a game he invented called reverse storytelling, where a friend or family member gives him the ending of a story or memory, and he has to invent the beginning and middle, a mental exercise that requires creative thought, memory recall, and sequencing. This game is more than fun. It's cognitive training masked as play. And despite his age, he makes sure he sleeps with precision. He follows strict circadian hygiene, exposing himself to natural morning light, eating dinner at the same time, avoiding blue light in the evening, and practicing a breathing routine before bed that signals his brain it's time to rest. He understands that deep sleep is not just rest, but the time when the brain consolidates memories, clears metabolic waste, and rejuvenates the mind. Everything he does, every habit he builds, is intentionally aligned with how the aging brain works and how it can still flourish. His daily lifestyle is not some extraordinary gift he was born with, but a carefully cultivated system that he believes any senior could adopt with a little patience and dedication. The beauty of his routine lies in its simplicity and sustainability. It doesn't require money, high technology, or a background in science. It just requires consistency, engagement, and the belief that memory is not something that simply fades, but something that can be nurtured and grown at any age. In the later hours of the day, typically after a short afternoon walk and a nourishing, brain-healthy meal filled with omega-3 rich fish, colorful vegetables, and antioxidant-packed berries, the 94-year-old begins what he calls his brain gym, a self-made set of evening cognitive rituals that are more rigorous than they first appear, each designed not only to sharpen recall and problem-solving, but to anchor short-term memories into long-term storage. He begins this session by sitting down at a well-lit desk, surrounded by a few cherished books, an old analog clock, and a thick notebook he's used for over 20 years. This notebook isn't a journal in the traditional sense. It's a hybrid of memory recall, gratitude log, and mental challenge workbook, where he begins by writing down 10 things he did, saw, or heard that day without looking at any notes, relying entirely on raw recall to exercise his hippocampus. He challenges himself to include as many sensory details as possible, such as the exact shade of blue he noticed in the sky during his walk, the pattern of his teacup, or the exact phrase someone used during a phone call. Studies show that such rich encoding increases the likelihood that the brain will retain the memory, and he insists that sharpening this kind of sensory detail has helped him not only remember names and faces, but entire events with clarity. Following this, he reviews flashcards he made himself, simple cards, each containing one obscure vocabulary word, historical fact, or scientific concept. He cycles through them randomly, saying the answer aloud, and if he gets one wrong, he doesn't simply move on. He spends 2 to 3 minutes expanding on the idea, writing a paragraph or drawing a related diagram, reinforcing the knowledge through multiple sensory channels. Neuroscientists have found that multimodal learning, engaging sight, sound, motion, and language, greatly improves neural retention, especially in older adults. But the true heart of his evening cognitive practice is something he calls episodic simulation. This is not daydreaming. It's a deliberate act of mentally placing himself in past scenarios and altering details, predicting alternate outcomes, or reliving emotions. For example, he'll revisit a memory from 1972 where he gave a public lecture and imagine what would have happened if he had taken a different approach, or how the audience would have reacted if he'd added a particular anecdote. This task activates the medial temporal lobe, prefrontal cortex, and the posterior cingulate, all brain regions tied to memory formation, decision-making, and self-awareness. By treating memories as living, interactive spaces instead of static recordings, he strengthens neural networks that would otherwise atrophy with age. After this cognitive work, he engages in a calming ritual designed to cue the brain for sleep without abrupt transitions. This includes a brief 5-minute meditation where he repeats a phrase like, "My mind is sharp, my memories are safe," breathing slowly and deeply, synchronizing his heartbeat and his thoughts into a relaxed, grounded state. He then reads aloud from a familiar book, never a new one at night, because rereading known material at bedtime has been linked to emotional security and sleep onset consistency, especially in elderly individuals who may experience age-related anxiety at night. He ends the night with what he calls his legacy letter, where he writes a short note to himself or to future generations, not necessarily to be sent, but to be stored as a record of perspective. These are deeply personal reflections that allow emotional processing, identity reinforcement, and narrative thinking, all of which are essential for keeping the aging mind integrated and coherent. He believes that seniors begin to forget not just facts, but who they are when they stop telling their story, even if only to themselves. He considers this act of putting his life, memories, and thoughts into words an exercise of memory dignity, where one's lived experiences are never wasted, but continuously revisited and appreciated. His approach defies what many assume about aging. While some may say cognitive decline is inevitable, he stands as living evidence that the brain, like any other organ, thrives when treated with care, attention, and daily stimulation. His decades-long system didn't come from a lab or a supplement bottle, but from carefully observing what made him feel alive, alert, and emotionally connected to the world. And when asked whether it's too late for someone in their 60s, 70s, or even 80s to begin something similar, he always smiles and says, "Your brain is never the problem. It's your belief that it's too late. Change that belief, and everything else becomes possible." His life proves that cognitive resilience is not reserved for the genetically gifted or the highly educated, but is the reward for those who embrace curiosity, consistency, and emotional engagement with the same discipline we apply to physical health. By showing up for his brain every day, whether by learning a word, recalling a moment, or writing a reflection, he keeps the door open to new growth, even at 94. In the final phase of his daily brain rejuvenation strategy, the 94-year-old masterfully weaves together cognitive engagement, emotional regulation, physical stimulation, and meaningful social connection into a nightly routine so elegant and effective that neurologists and geriatric specialists alike are astounded by its simplicity and science-backed precision. After completing his solo brain exercises, he begins a lesser-known but equally powerful part of his cognitive practice: conversational memory reinforcement. Before bed, he initiates a brief, intimate conversation with a close family member, either in person or via phone or video call. But this is not idle chit-chat. Instead, he deliberately steers the discussion toward recounting moments from their shared past, like the time they got lost on a road trip or laughed until tears came at a birthday dinner, then challenges them both to recall as many minute details as possible. This practice is rooted in a powerful neurological principle known as collaborative recall, where shared memory reconstruction not only strengthens individual memory, but enhances social bonding, which itself reduces cortisol, lowers systemic inflammation, and boosts brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, a key molecule in neuroplasticity and memory repair. And because he knows that loneliness is a silent killer in old age, just as dangerous as smoking or obesity, this consistent, meaningful connection serves both brain and heart. But the most unexpected part of his nightly ritual involves a physical object, a small, weathered wooden box filled with slips of paper, each containing a single life lesson, quote, or insight he's gathered over the decades. Every night, he randomly draws one, reads it aloud, and meditates on how it applies to his current life. If the slip reads, "Patience is the companion of wisdom," he'll ask himself, "Where was I patient today? Where could I have been more patient?" This reflective practice blends metacognition with emotional processing, encouraging what psychologists call self-directed neuroplasticity, essentially training your brain to wire itself toward wisdom, calm, and insight. It's this slow, intentional mental rewiring that many experts now believe may be one of the most critical protective factors against dementia, depression, and cognitive decline. And remarkably, he doesn't stop there. Before turning out the lights, he performs a physical ritual to close his day. A slow-paced, mindful movement series inspired by Qigong and modified Tai Chi with gentle arm sweeps, deep knee bends, and rhythmic breathing. He stimulates both blood flow and vagus nerve activation, which supports sleep onset and deep rest. This combination of movement and breath harmonizes brain waves into a theta state, a deeply relaxed, pre-sleep pattern shown to be associated with memory consolidation and subconscious learning. As he finishes his final stretch, he whispers a short phrase to himself, always the same words, "Today I used my mind with honor." This simple affirmation, spoken daily, creates a sense of purpose and continuity that aging adults so often lose as their careers end. Children grow up and social roles shift. He believes that a brain without a purpose to serve begins to retreat, but one that feels needed, if only to remember, reflect, and grow, is a brain that stays awake and alive. Then, in the final minutes before sleep, he places a lavender-scented cloth on his chest, turns on soft instrumental music tuned to 432 Hz, and closes his eyes, entering a rest state that is not just recovery, but integration. As he sleeps, his brain, primed by deliberate practice, rich in oxygen and low in inflammation, works to consolidate the neural gains of the day. His sleep quality, monitored for years by his physician, remains remarkable. Minimal nighttime waking, high REM percentage, and consistent sleep architecture that resembles someone decades younger. Doctors who have reviewed his cognitive scores, reaction time, verbal fluency, and memory recall routinely mistake his charts for those of a man in his 50s or 60s, not a 94-year-old. But he doesn't rely on genetics alone. In fact, his family history includes both Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, making his mental longevity even more noteworthy. When asked by curious doctors and journalists how he's managed to stay so sharp, he smiles and says, "I take care of my brain the way most people take care of their teeth, daily, deliberately, and with love." He emphasizes that while supplements and prescriptions have their place, true brain resilience is forged in the small choices made every day. Choosing to read instead of watch, to walk instead of sit, to reflect instead of complain. His legacy is not just his memory, but his philosophy that no one is ever too old, too tired, or too far gone to reclaim their mental vitality. What makes his story so powerful is not the uniqueness of the tools he uses, but the consistency, heart, and intention behind them. He's living proof that mental clarity and emotional richness are not things we lose to time, but things we must choose to cultivate. He encourages every senior and every family member who loves one to begin today, not next week or next year, because the sooner we invest in our brain health, the more years we give ourselves to live fully, love deeply, and remember clearly. And as the night deepens and he drifts off into restful sleep, his mind, still vibrant, still growing, quietly prepares itself for another day of learning, connection, and joyful awareness, showing the world that memory loss is not an inevitability, but a challenge that can be reversed, one intentional habit at a time.